This episode is proudly supported by OpenTable.
Nearly 1/3 of diners are booking same day. So they're making those decisions on the spot. And 10% are making their bookings within just a few hours. And so it's why it's so important to have booking software like OpenTable, which allows your diners to discover you. And so when restaurants are on platforms like OpenTable, they're much more likely to be discovered. We help diners to connect to restaurants. Ultimately, having technology, using technology, helps you to reattach to those diners.
Experience the power of OpenTable. For an exclusive offer, visit restaurant.opentable.com.au/DITW.
One of the things that is important about La Tortilleria is that we sort of look at ourselves like a family. And I think that's an important value, not only of Mexican cuisine, I think of many cuisines, or maybe every cuisine.
This is The Producers. I'm Dani Valent. In 2012, the Australian culinary landscape was experiencing a Mexican food wave. But there were a few things missing. Mexican-born Gerardo Lopez especially lamented the lack of traditional corn tortillas. He got busy researching, testing, and eventually making tortillas from locally grown grain. The vision has since expanded from a small-scale side hustle to La Tortilleria, a factory that processes hundreds of tonnes of corn annually, sends tortillas all around Australia, and exports them to Asia too. It's a company built on pride, commitment, and the joys of maize.
My name is Gerardo Lopez. I'm the owner, one of the owners, and co-founder of La Tortilleria. Really, what La Tortilleria is all about is the reason why we started this company was to make a difference in the marketplace when it comes to Mexican food. This is back in 2012 when Diane and I we were very excited about what we were seeing in terms of the Mexican movement changing in Australia. But we also felt like there was still a long way to go. And there were like particular staples or iconic products from Mexico that were needed. And one of them was the humble corn tortilla. And so what we did is we sort of wanted to make the best corn tortilla we could possibly do. And to do that, we went back to Mexico. We researched what would that be. As a Mexican, I have to say that I was ignorant about what a good tortilla or corn tortilla was. I thought like hundreds of people or thousands of people think is that a good corn tortilla is made with corn flour, and I was so mistaken about it. It's actually made with actual corn. So to do that possible in Australia, we not only had to get all the machinery from Mexico, but we also had to source the corn in Australia. And that's where the journey really started for us, is getting that corn in Australia and then follow that ancient process that is more than 6,000 years old to make corn tortillas using the kernel. And I think the best way of representing that is, everybody's familiar with coffee in Australia, but that's a movement also that started, a few years back. Before that, everything was instant coffee. So that's what we set to do, and that's what we wanted to change. We wanted to change the perception of what a good corn tortilla is and how good everything tastes on a good tortilla. So yeah, that's what we set out to do. At the beginning, we had the vision was that we would start in Kensington with our tortilla machine, making the tortillas there, but on the side, we'll have a taqueria where people could sample some of those tortillas and, a retail shop where they could take some of those tortillas home. And Diane and I, we were like, well, let's see which one of the two businesses takes off. We were in the industrial area of Kensington, so, we were like, this is better suited for the manufacturing, of the tortillas. But, weeks into the business, both of them were booming, and we sort of faced the dilemma of needing to go on opening a bigger manufacturing facility to bake our delicious tortillas, and then expanding that little restaurant in Kensington to be have more space and offering more to people. And yeah, that's where the journey started. And now we are about to open our second one on the south side, and it's just been driven primarily by demand.
Corn is a foundation of Mexican cuisine, the crop that helped found civilizations and cities. A tortilla made from corn must have good flavour, excellent fragrance, and great playability. The worst possible taco experience is a torn tortilla.
I guess in Mexico, we use a lot of corn, right? So and that's a staple of the diet of any Mexican will be corn. Corn is the foundation, and corn is originally from Mexico, and that's the one sort of crop that we think that gave rise to all these big civilizations in Mexico, like the Aztecs and the Mayans, and tortillas is something that has been there for millennia. We don't know how long. In the chronicles of the Spaniards, when they came to Mexico, there's a reference to something like a tortilla, or what we know today as a tortilla. I think the term tortilla, it comes from Spain, doesn't really come from Mexico, but it's basically a carrier, right? And in Mexico, we carry everything on a corn tortilla, and when you put something on a corn tortilla, it becomes a taco. And we eat tacos of everything that you can imagine, everything. And a good corn tortilla is something that has to be flavorsome. Needs to taste like corn, because that's the main ingredient. And also needs to have playability. And that playability, it comes not from the process, because corn doesn't have gluten, but it comes from us, particularly for our tortillas, from keeping all the outer shell of the corn, and gives a little bit of fiber, extra fiber to give this pliability to the tortilla, so it doesn't break. There's nothing worse that you having a taco and the whole thing falls apart. is not only embarrassing, but it just deters from the whole experience of having a good taco. So that to me is a good tortilla. I think it's using all your senses, really. Needs to smell, because tortillas are a good tortilla is more than 50% humidity. So all of that will, once you reheat it, all that will come into the steam of the tortilla. So that aroma will come out. It's all about the playability. In your hands, you need to feel it. It needs to feel like a tortilla. It needs to look like a tortilla. Tortillas are not white. Tortillas are, because corn is not necessarily white, and the nixtamalization process, which is the ancient process that we follow, will change that color. So really, the corn tortillas are very, very rarely white. So to your eyes, it needs to look like that, and to your taste, it just needs to taste like corn.
Nixtamalization is a big word for an ancient process. It's the technique by which dried corn is soaked in an alkaline solution to unlock nutrition and give tortillas their distinctive flavour and character.
Nixtamalization is a very ancient process. And this process, as I said before, I think it dates about 5,000 to 6,000 years old. And corn is older than that. Is about 8,000 to 12,000 years old. And corn was originally domesticated by indigenous Mexicans from wild grass. And it was just this wild grass with, had a little bit of, some sort of a flowering with kernels coming out, very, very small, very gentle ones. And, they started to cultivate it, and they started to, play with it, so that with time, it just grew to be what we know now as corn, and not to be confused with sweet corn. And I'll get onto that later on. But once corn was domesticated, then humans were able to stay in one place. They didn't have to be nomads anymore. Corn allowed them to, build cities, civilizations, as mentioned. But there was an issue with the corn. The corn once it dries, it becomes very hard. And yes, that allows you to have the corn and keep the corn throughout the seasons, throughout the year, but it was very hard. So indigenous Mexicans, what they started to do is started to add wood ashes, or started to add naturally occurring lime, which basically you can find in the rivers. So when you go to a river and there's that sort of like white sort of trail, particularly when a river is low in the tide or has dried up a little bit, you find that sort of white powder on the side. That is basically what a naturally occurring lime is. So they started playing with all of that, and they found that by adding either one of those, they will get a softer corn at the end. And nixtamalization is nothing else than do with that. So we boil the corn, we bring it almost to boil, we add the calcium hydroxide, and then we let it rest. We basically remove any heat sources, and then we let it rest. In Mexico, there's a saying that you put your corn, you started nixtamalization at night, and you don't wake up the corn until the next day when the roosters are crowing. I don't know if crowing is the right word, but anyways, when the rooster sings in the morning. And that's what it is. It's just about allowing the corn to suck into that calcium hydroxide, or the natural occurring lime, and that allows to soften the corn. But what indigenous Mexicans didn't know is that by doing that, they discover a way of making corn more digestible by our bodies. Not only is it's easier to digest, but also is more nutritional, because this nixtamalization process releases the essential amino acids that are so good for your body, and also additional calcium. So the whole process on its own it suddenly became extremely nutritional, and that's the reason why when corn was taken into Africa or Europe and they didn't take nixtamalization with them, a disease was developed that is called pellagra, which is basically an anemia. And it's because once they started changing their diets into corn, but not using nixtamalization, corn was coming in and going out. So it wasn't adding any nutritional value to the body. And that's what indigenous people have, discovered for all of us.
Corn ain't corn. Sweet corn and tortilla corn are both types of maize, but they're far from interchangeable. Gerardo talks about working with farmers to source the right corn in Australia.
Corn or maize in Australia has been grown for many years, I would say decades, if not centuries, but has been used primarily for cattle feeding and also for export. Very, very little was consumed for human consumption. So that process of trying to find it was pretty hard, because majority of the corn that we find in Australia is sweet corn. And sweet corn is not a cereal, it's a vegetable. It has its origins in maize or corn, as we know it everywhere in the world. But somehow its process and growing was changed so that it's more tender and it doesn't have to grow to maturity. So basically they stop the process halfway. And then that's how you consume sweet corn. But sweet corn is a vegetable, is nutritionally deficient in many ways. It tastes good, but it's not doing much to your body. Whereas maize, is the cereal, so it's the one that it trades as a commodity as well, and international markets. Now in Mexico, there's more than 100 varieties of corn, and you can find all the colors of the rainbow and in between, for all those different colors of corn. It goes from like white to yellow to green to pink to red to blue to black to purple, anything that you can imagine. And they all have different properties. The most common one is definitely the white corn and the yellow corn. But the most, I think, in my opinion, the most delicious, but also the one that has the most nutritional value will be the blue corn. Blue corn is not currently grown in Australia, but we're working on a project to make that a reality soon. the corn that is grown from our tortillas, it comes from Queensland. Queensland border New South Wales. I guess once you're there, the borders are no longer, a thing. Inland, in a region close to Casino, New South Wales, but more towards Queensland. So that's where we get the corn, from different farmers that we basically on a yearly basis we agree to a tonnage of or a volume of corn that we're gonna get, and then we go and source it. I remember when we started La Tortilleria, we were doing maybe, or aiming to do a ton of corn a year. Now we're doing, 200 tons, so the demand for corn has grown exponentially because not only because of tortillas, but also because of tortilla chips, or totopos as we call them. We have seen, a growth in this market, over the years.
Gerardo wasn't born to a life of tortilla making. He explains the circuitous journey that led to La Tortilleria.
When I first told my parents that I was going to make tortillas, they were not very happy about it because they're like, oh, all that, professional education that we gave you, all for you to end up just making tortillas. Because in Mexico, making tortillas is, it's a tradesman job. You don't have to go to uni. So for them it was a shocker. No, I have to say no. I never thought that's what I was gonna end up doing. So I left Mexico when I was 22. So that's now it's almost half of my life. It's actually more than half of my life that I've been living abroad. So I first went to the UK. I went to London to get a master's degree, and then from there I was recruited out from Los Angeles. So I moved to Los Angeles, and I lived there for 6 years. I have to say that LA, even though there's a lot of Mexican food, I wasn't really impressed with the Mexican food in LA. And really what happens is California has developed their own cuisine. Mexican cuisine is developed by different regions. So every region will have their own sort of food, and we're very jealous about our own food. And we always think that in whatever region we're in Mexico, that's the best. Whereas in California, suddenly all these Mexicans from different regions found themselves there. And they all have to adapt, right? They all have to adapt, and that's where Cali-Mex cuisine comes in, and that's where burritos, for example, come from. They don't come from Mexico, or at least not the burrito that we know comes from Mexico. So they developed their own cuisine. But I was in California, and I was like, this is not the Mexican food that I like. This is not the Mexican food that I'm used to. So what I started doing is, cooking my own cuisine and trying different things, having dinner parties and all that, developed some recipes as well while I was there. And then in 2009, I had I would say the privilege of making it to the top of Mount Everest. Climbing has always been my passion. I was climbing since I was 12 in Mexico. There's big mountains in Mexico too. And that sort of prompted me to, when I was coming down, I was like, I need to change my life. I need something different. And so I started looking at this side of the world as a part of the world that I've never been. And I requested my employer at the time if I could transfer. And they're like, yeah, sure enough, we can send you to Melbourne. And I was like, Melbourne? Where is Melbourne? I thought it was a Sydney, but I didn't know there was a Melbourne. And I'm like, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. So I've came to Melbourne, and as soon as I landed in Melbourne, I was like, there is a gap here. There is a gap when it comes to Mexican food, and that's where that's how exactly La Tortilleria started, because we saw that gap. My intention was never to leave my job, so I was doing that as a side hustle. I was like, we'll have the restaurant, and I was doing the first year of La Tortilleria. I was still doing consulting for a multinational while still running La Tortilleria. So it was never my intention to make this sort of my life career. be a tortilla man. One of the main things I guess I take from my previous career as a consultant is the networking and relationship building, which I think has been very important for growing the business of La Tortilleria. At the end of the day, you need to sell your passion. You need to sell that product not only to the people coming through the door to the restaurant, but also to all the other restaurants and retailers that are using our product. So I think consulting, because is fast paced, is ever sort of client facing. On a day you can be interacting with 10 different clients and they all need to be happy. I took a lot of that into my day to day. It's at the end of the day, there's so many stakeholders, and you're the beauty of the restaurant though, compared to consulting, not only restaurant and wholesale as well, is that when you're doing consulting, particularly in a field like information security, is that people, they're not generally happy when you finish a job, because they're also doing the job, right? And they're doing the job for other reasons, whether it's, compliance or somebody told them to do it. So they're like, okay, well, thank you. Whereas, when you're doing food, you can see the reward right there in front of you when people smile, or when people are having a attack and they're loving it. You're like, what does it get better than that? And they're going to leave your place, happy, and hopefully that, permeates to other places and other people. Whereas when I was doing consulting, it just short-lived, if you know what I mean.
It started small, but La Tortilleria tortillas and totopos, corn chips, are now found in every corner of Australia and as far away as Asia, driven by Aussie expat addiction.
The tortilla brand is sold everywhere in Australia. From, I sometimes I get fascinated. We can find them in, Flinders Island, or we can find it in the Whitsundays. There is these random places that they normally get it. We also export into Singapore and Hong Kong, and I think that has been driven primarily by expats from Australia going over there and saying, hold on, we know there's a better product in Australia. How about we get it? And there's a lot of aggregation of products from Australia going into those places. So yeah, we just jump onto that, and yeah, we also international. Yeah, and it's funny because it's a Mexican product made in Australia and sold overseas.
Authenticity is an endlessly problematic concept when it comes to food. Gerardo explains what it means to him.
Authenticity to me is something that looks, tastes, feels as you remember it when you were growing up or when you visited a place, right? And therefore, authenticity could change a lot, because, my household will be very different to, another Mexican in Mexico, here in Australia. And therefore, authenticity for them is going to be very different to mine. So I think authenticity to me is, as long as it has a connection back to, that origin, that place of origin, then it is authentic. And there's no reason why it shouldn't be authentic. And I think when the link is lost, that's when authenticity goes out of the window. And I think that's where, places that selling Mexican food, but at the end of the day, they're doing Tex-Mex or Cali-Mex, they lose that authenticity, right? Because they should be calling for what it is. It is Tex-Mex, it is Cali-Mex. We're not doing Mexican, I think that's where things get a little bit sidetracked. The same way, if you're doing fusion, because I think Mexican food is one of those ones that can be fusion very well with, say, for example, Asian, And if you're doing it, let's call it for what it is, It is modern Mexican or fusion Mexican, So yeah, that's sort of my take on authenticity. But I have to say though that Mexican food in Australia is just growing at a very accelerated pace. I remember, when Mamacita opened and when we first started La Tortilleria, I thought, this is a Mexican wave, and I think even the media was talking about the Mexican wave and all of that. And look, then after that, the pandemic hit, and then Sydney's going gangbusters, like not even at the pace that Melbourne was going, 6 or 8 years ago. And I think, Brisbane and Queensland will be the next, and it's going to be even bigger. So this is like a never-ending wave. It's sort of like a building up into a tsunami sort of thing, and a lot of places around Australia are doing very interesting things and very, I would say, authentic things in their own rights, you know.
La Tortilleria is a family company in structure and in nature. It's reflective of a Mexican approach that Gerardo values in life and his business.
One of the things that is important about La Tortilleria is that we sort of look at ourselves like a family, and I think that's an important value, not only of Mexican cuisine, I think of many cuisines, or maybe every cuisine in the world, is that a lot of them revolve around family, you know, and sitting down and, you know, eating together. And that's one of the things that we always wanted to do with Mexican, but that's also something that has permeated into the company, where, you know, I think we all feel like a family. We're part of a family. We all have a role to play, but we also have someone, you know, that is always going to be there to back us up or help us through the process. And also that's what I feel like Chilpa is all about, is La Tortilleria Eatery, the one that we started in Kensington. It was sort of this taqueria where we just wanted to have people an experience where they come in, you know, have a taco, have some chilaquiles, and then go. Whereas Chilpa is more about of a family style, you know, getting around the table, big tables, getting together, because finally we have the space to do that. So that's what it is. I think La Tortilleria is a big family, and it's a big family of not only us that work in the company, but also all our customers that support us, both, you know, home cooks, but as well as, you know, big chefs and people all over Australia.
Owning a business means doing a bit of everything. Gerardo loves the endless variety and learning.
I love the flexibility of, you know, doing different things. And you know, today, you know, I'm doing IT stuff, you know, at Chilpa, but, you know, the day after tomorrow, I could be, you know, doing media. And the day after, I could be, you know, on a plane to Nusa, you know, to visit some customers and make sure that they're happy, you know, or I could be working on new products. So it's just the flexibility and the constant sort of challenge of doing something new. And I think the same applies to everybody in the company. You know, is that continuous learning, and I think that's what is so cool about La Tortilleria.
Gerardo Lopez has brought a key element of Mexican cuisine to Australian homes and restaurants, giving cooks and chefs the opportunity to connect with ancient techniques and flavours using locally grown ingredients. The business continues to grow beyond anything he could have imagined, but it's still built on humble foundations. The desire for a tasty carrying medium for taco ingredients that is also nutritious and, crucially, has structural integrity. This is The Producers, a Deep in the Weeds production. I'm Dani Valent. Stay tuned as we talk to some of Australia's best farmers, makers and growers. Follow us on Instagram at Producers Podcast or contact us via deepintheweeds.com.au.